I think we'll go ahead and get started. We may wait a moment more while I go ahead and thank our partners, the Louisiana Folklore Society, the Center for Bayou Studies at Nicholls State, Folk Life in Louisiana, the Center for Louisiana Studies, and the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center. I'd also really like to give a big thank you to our funders, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, and the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Brooks Washington, who will be hosting the first hour of this of our meeting, and who's responsible for this great new slide format we have. So Brooks, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm so excited to be back. Thank y'all for letting me host again. I just want to say thank you for everybody for coming in today. And I know that today is just going to be a great day of collaboration and just some great thoughts. We have an amazing speaker lineup for you guys. But before we get started, we're going to focus on our spotlight from the Passing It On workshops from Louisiana Division of the Arts Folk Life program. Okay, so today we're going to be spotlighting Jessica Brown. She is an awesome individual, and she has done a cloth doll making workshop at the Finding Our Roots African American Museum in Houma. And from a personal experience, I wish I would have had something like this growing up. She focuses on instilling confidence in young girls, as far as just letting them know and appreciate that their skin color is beautiful regardless of their complexion. And also the young girls who do participate in this workshop, they have to have like a guardian or a parent there with them to just kind of help reinstill all of the great qualities, all of the great things going on at home. And you can also check out more about this story, check out more about what Jessica is doing at jessiesdolls.com. Maida did leave that link down in the chat. So if you guys are more interested in that, if you want to have more information about that, please go ahead and click that. And yeah, she's awesome. She's awesome, you guys. Okay, so today we have some great stuff cooking up for y'all. We're going to start off with our speaker, Dr. Scott Himmerlin. He is super awesome, and I can't wait to actually get into what he's going to be talking about today. Then we're going to break it down to a deep question and breakout room discussion. And this is where we really want you guys to just collaborate. Just feel free to not only talk about the deep question, but also share your thoughts, make those connections, and take those connections that you made here today and bring them outside, because I know that they will be beneficial to not only you, but to everything that BCC stands for. And then I feel like these past couple of weeks have been really tough, just all of the things going on around in the world. So we like to do a little something, little positivity going on here. And we like to do a hope for the coast. And this is where you guys will be able to share your thoughts, what you guys hope to see as far as the coast is involved, or maybe even the world, especially nowadays. You can share that you can share that with us verbally, or you can share that in the chat. We'll be happy to mention that. Then we'll do announcements. So anything nice, anything great, anything positive, please share with us. We're definitely here for that. And then, as Mike mentioned earlier, we do have some amazing working groups doing some amazing, awesome things. And so they're going to be doing reports. And we also, finally have a webpage up. So if you guys want to know how to join, you guys can head over to that webpage. Maida will definitely put that link down in the chat for you guys for easier access. And then we'll have a general discussion and sharing and tell too. So just thank you guys for joining. Thank you so much. But I think we're going to get started and introduce our speaker. Oh, wait, first we're going to do the poll question. Then we're going to do the speaker. So our poll question is, what cultural tradition is most important in coastal planning? A, traditional ecological knowledge. B, oral history and cultural memory. C, hunting and harvesting. D, sacred sites. E, folk skills like basket making, net making. F, none of this is crucial. Or G, all equally important. You guys should see a poll that's just popped up.
You can
Not too
choose
long
as many
ago.
as you'd like. Sorry, Brooks.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Mike. You can choose as many as you like and submit it. And then we're going to reveal the results shortly after.
Yeah, thanks, Brooks. We got this poll set up so that we can have multiple, so that people can choose multiple options. And I'm curious to see what we learned.
Definitely. And if you guys don't see something that y'all think should be on this list, add it in the chat.
Oh, yes.
We're really curious.
Yes, that is important too. To let us know if you do think there's something else that we haven't listed here.
Definitely. We racked our brains about this. So we were trying to figure out where can we get some good options. We're trying to make it difficult, but not too difficult for y'all to choose. Okay, awesome. So I don't know if this popped up on y'all's end, but it seems that everybody agrees, 76% agrees that all of these cultural traditions are equally important. So that is something to kind of keep in mind, and maybe something that we can all talk about a little bit later on. Mike, do you have anything else to add before we introduce Scott?
No, that's I'm always interested to see our poll results, and as you know, it's just a good way to frame the rest of the meeting and kind of sort of start us off. So no, Brooks, if you want to take it away and introduce Scott, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say.
Yes. Thanks, Mike. So I would like to introduce Scott. He is a senior research scientist with the Water Institute of the Gulf. He focuses on research related to climate adaptation and community resilience. He is a cultural geographer with more than 20 years of experience investigating the impacts of environmental change on coastal communities. His recent work is focused on developing approaches to incorporate local knowledge into assessments of community resilience and quantifying the social value of ecosystem restoration projects. And just a fun fact, Scott is from New York. The closest I've been to New York is Home Alone. So don't laugh at me, y'all. I'm very country and I want to be somewhere in New York. So maybe afterwards you can give me some good spots to go to. I'm just saying. Virtual round of applause, y'all, for Scott. And thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to hear what you got to talk about, man.
All right. Thank y'all for having me. And for the record, I'm from Buffalo, so other side of the state, but I can point you to some good places to get buffalo wings. So we could chat about that offline. But again, thank you all for having me here. And I'm going to share my screen with y'all real quick. And hopefully you see it. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is really the intersection of really community engagement and modeling. How can we, as we all know, when we think of the state's coastal master plan and things like that, a lot of our coastal planning processes are very heavily driven by numerical models. But we also, as everyone on this call is aware, there's really a lot of importance around traditional ecological knowledge and local and traditional knowledge. And oftentimes there seems to be a disconnect between these two. So a lot of the work that I've been doing at the Water Institute in the last few years is really focused on trying to find ways that we can bring local knowledge into the coastal planning process, and particularly into numerical models and things like that. So now, for a bit of background, in kind of traditional research, we have technical science-based knowledge, and that's where our things like predictive models, risk indicators, ecosystem services calculations, benefit cost analyses, all of these kind of technical science processes are often given priority over the local experience-based knowledge, over the experience that community members, the things that they recognize in their daily lives, living in the environment. And as a result of this, a lot of research has shown, and probably people on the call can attest to this, but I know definitely from my perspective, working with community members, a lot of residents feel disenfranchised by the entire process. We hear a lot that people are fatigued, frustrated, they feel ignored by policymakers and planners. And a lot of that is the result of that kind of scientific planning process, which community groups often feel to be exclusionary and undemocratic. Residents feel like they don't have a voice in the coastal planning process. But if we think about coastal protection and restoration and how to move the process forward in a socially just manner and in a manner that really can be most effective in addressing local issues, the planning process really needs to find a balance between these science-driven processes and engagement with residents and stakeholder groups. And again, these residents and stakeholder groups are vulnerable to the risk, and they're most likely to be affected by the policy actions that the state and scientific community often makes. So I think a big piece of this is how can we need to strike that balance. We don't want to disregard the modeling. A lot of this, the modeling that the state of Louisiana is doing is really on the cutting edge of our kind of technical science, and we're really pushing the envelope on that. What we really want to do is find a way to elevate the social science, elevate that local knowledge, elevate the voices of the local residents, and try to get it on equal footing with some of the scientific modeling. So what I'm going to talk about today is just some of the methodological advances that we use, particularly in terms of gathering local and traditional knowledge. Things like environmental competency groups that we use a lot here, which is really a sustained engagement process where, within the Water Institute, I try to shift the way we talk about and refer to community members and scientists. We as the scientists are the technical knowledge experts. Community members are local knowledge experts. So this environmental competency group approach is really a way to elevate and realize that both sources of knowledge are equally valid and treat them in that way. And some of the ways that we do that are through participatory mapping and participatory modeling. And I'll give some examples of some of our work that we've done within the Institute the last few years on those areas. And I'll begin with kind of a conversation on local and traditional knowledge. And I know in previous calls, that's been a topic of conversation with TEK and LTK. Now, however we term it, it really is this. It is a valuable source of knowledge for community members. And what we see here is, and this is work that Matt Bethel from Sea Grant, years ago when he brought the kind of SciTech process in. When we talk about mapping local and traditional knowledge, how can we take this and get it into a framework where it can be used by scientists and planners? And what we have here is just an example when we went out and did some spatial video geo-narrative research with some communities down in Terrebonne Parish. And going down, and you can see using the video, we can see flooded areas. We get, go through, transcribe, we do the interviews and a lot of that kind of research. But one of the things we can do with that is we can take this local knowledge. We can take, once we get it transcribed, we can drop a GIS point in. Every time someone talks about the word water, we can start taking that knowledge and without losing the basis of it. In the example we have here, we can see every the GIS pins where people talk about water, but you can see we also have the quotes. We can find out what people said, and that's really a way to try to blend that qualitative and the more geospatial quantitative data together. So I use that as kind of the background. A lot of, this is kind of, there's ways we can do this as we're showing here in GIS. There's also ways with tabletop mapping, and that's what I'm going to talk about with the first project, which was a project we did back starting in 2018, really kicking off in 2019, over a couple months in 2019, after the CPRA asked for proposals for new projects or project concepts to be modeled in the 2023 Coastal Master Plan. So in February of 2020, the Water Institute pulled together a broad group of stakeholders from Lower Plaquemines Parish to really gather their knowledge and come up with a project idea that for them to submit and bring the scientific expertise that we have here to take their knowledge and get it into a format, whether it's adding attributes to the data, something that can kind of help this proposal make it through the CPRA process to potentially be modeled in the 2023 master plan. Then the next slide, you don't need to worry about the quote, but here's just an example of some of the tabletop mapping outputs that we had for this, where in the first meeting we went through and we talked to residents and we got their quotes, we transcribed the quotes, we did all of that kind of qualitative research that anthropologists and folks use, took the data and brought it into Max QDA and did the data transcribing and coding and everything, and tied that to some of these hand-drawn points on the map. So a lot of these are project ideas. What do they want to protect? If we're going to try to protect communities, we have to understand what is it that people value in that community? What is it that they need to be protected from? How accurate are the models? And I think that's one thing that, and we'll get into that with some of the later slides, that we need to really start looking at the accuracy of some of the model inputs and how we can use local knowledge to improve that accuracy. So with the project in Lower Plaquemines, we essentially took what we see here, these paper maps. We went back in office, we basically, in GIS, we went and matched everything to the landscape. If someone said they wanted to do a ridge restoration, well, let's go back and find out historically where those ridges were and go through and take those hand-drawn segments that they had and get it into a GIS. But one thing that the community said is they didn't want to see a group of separate projects. They said they want to see this interconnection. So essentially what we did was develop this kind of interlinked group of sediment injection sites, siphons, where do they want to see terracing, marsh creation? And we went back and forth with the community members over this and refined this to make sure that it addressed what their concerns were. And a lot of the co-benefits they mentioned, they want to rebuild habitat, reduce vegetation loss. They want to help control the hydrology. Obviously, salinity control is a big issue down in Plaquemines, potentially with the diversions coming online, storm surge protection, land building. But they're also interested in improving the quality of life and maintaining wildlife populations and protecting infrastructure. So all of these kind of background factors went into the development of the map we see on the right here, which is this kind of integrated system approach to coastal restoration projects. And I will say, kind of as an aside, we got it wrong the first time. After we had the meeting, we did the tabletop mapping, we went back in office, we drew everything up, we went back, and the community members who were in the meeting said, none of these are connected. You kind of missed that kind of systems approach that we were looking for. So in that second meeting, we went back and refined everything. We connected the siphons to the marsh creation projects, to the terraces. We went back and redid this with the community members in process and really refined this. So we were able to submit this to CPRA. And in October of 2019, so that was a year after they put out the initial call, which was, I think, due March 1st of 2019. But in October, the parish was informed that the suite of projects that was developed would be modeled by the state, which is a necessary first step for their consideration for inclusion into the master plan. So, what the final projects look like when they are modeled, if they pull segments out, how that works, we don't know. But I think the key thing here is we were able to take that information from the community member and blend it together, bringing the community members with the scientists together, bring something that is meaningful to the community and get that included in the modeling process. And I think that is, like we say, that's really a key first step that was necessary for inclusion in the master plan. So again, this is just one way that we can kind of, when we talk about at first I talked about collecting that local and traditional knowledge. This is really how we took that local and traditional knowledge and translated it and transformed it into something that could be used to be modeled in the master plan. But now to talk about actually incorporating this local and traditional knowledge into some work, I'm going to talk about a project that came after the one in Lower Plaquemines, where we kind of took that to the next step. And beginning in fall of 2019, we convened another environmental competency group in Lower Lafourche Parish to work with the Partnership for a Working Coast. And that's a public-private partnership centered on Port Fourchon. And the group includes Water Institute scientists, local resource users, TEK experts from Lafourche Parish. I will say we had about, usually our competency groups are about 10 to 15 people that meet multiple times. We initially kicked this off. We did one in St. Bernard, and we met monthly over an 8-month period. The Plaquemines Parish one, we met twice in 1 month, and then the following month we had kind of a reporting out. This one, which we're just kind of completing now, and the timeline, which we'll get to, we were kind of, a lot of things happened in 2020. So we had to kind of alter some of what we did with this, but we had several meetings over the course of 2020 to develop this. But what Port Fourchon was interested in is, what we see here is a lot of the sediment and some of the, in the channel. They're interested in dredging out the channel and deepening it, which would result in about 20 million cubic yards of sediment. Now, generally with the Corps' process, you have to just let them know for the EIS that you have a place to dispose of this material. And usually it's going to be the cheapest place. What the port is interested in is, how can we use this 20 million cubic yards of sediment to do things like protect critical infrastructure, enhance ecosystem services, promote community resilience, quantify carbon capture. These are all things that the port was interested in, and finding the best place to put this dredge material to generate as much co-benefits as we can. So what we did was took a community-driven approach where, again, we use science-based decision-making, a modeling-based approach where we modeled 30 years of landscape evolution, but we needed to include community engagement in this. We needed to, as part of the process, pull together the environmental competency group. So the group included members of the Port Commission and tenants of the port, nearby residents, commercial and charter fishermen, camp owners, LDWF, Louisiana Sea Grant, and then geologists, ecologists, modelers from the Water Institute, where we pulled the group together and said, okay, how can we co-design a nature-based solution where we can use this material in the way that'll generate the most cost benefits? So we used local knowledge mapping, participatory modeling, like I mentioned before, and then we also had a small social return and investment part, which I'll get into a bit here. So the first meeting we had, where we kind of pulled the group together, we convened down at the port's headquarters. And you can see here a photo from the first meeting. February of 2020 was when we had our first meeting. And I'll mention the previous iterations of this was an 8-month process, meeting in person on a monthly basis, doing a lot of tabletop mapping. Well, obviously, February 2020, things changed pretty quickly in March of 2020. So we had to figure out ways that we could transition this entire process to virtual engagement. And we were supposed to have our second meeting in March. We were probably delayed until May before we could have our second meeting, because we simply didn't have the technology to do the types of, we wanted to replicate that tabletop mapping process. So it took us a couple months to get to allow the technology to allow us to do what we needed to do. So again, we transitioned the local knowledge mapping process to a web-based survey platform. And we can see an example of it here on the screen. And so when we did have that second meeting, we kind of went through with the community members, bringing in some of our modelers, but also the full competency group. Again, scientists, local residents, port folks, fishermen. But what is a model? What is a model grid? What is model uncertainty? Let's take the hood off of the science and make sure the community understands what goes into this. If they say, can you model my duck blind? Which they did say that. It's like, your knee-jerk reaction is, oh no, we can't do that. The real answer is, we could do it, but the computing capacity is beyond us. It would take far too long to run these. It's the model. So explaining all of these things, what is with our model grid. So if we say we can't do something, it's just no, we don't just say, no, we can't do it, but here's the reasons why, and making sure that they understand. And we basically rebuilt the models from scratch with the community members involved. So in this, and I mentioned before, in this meeting, this is where bringing in some of the local knowledge really helps. Let's look at the elevation. Let's look at the bathy topo. What do we get wrong? You know, we can see areas on the image on the right where the depths are obviously off, and the community members looked and said, okay, this is deeper here than what your inputs are showing. Wetland vegetation and other types of vegetation. They pointed out areas where there was a reforestation project that our vegetation maps missed. So we went back through using this local knowledge and updated our inputs to the model. And again, we used the wave heights and surge heights from Gustav, which is a lot of the folks kind of had, we found out which storm they wanted us to run. So they could look at that and say, okay, here's what your models kind of get wrong with the wave heights and surge heights. So let's alter those as we're going. And then the third meeting, again, I mentioned before, what is it we want to protect? What is it the community is interested in? So again, this was done on a virtual platform here, but we can see that people marked what the places of value to them were. And we were very clear, what they define as value is a personal, it is what they value. So if they say we are interested in, you know, the local fishing hole, we'll add that there. If it's a place where their families had a family reunion for the last 20 years, that's a place of value to you. So we can take those data and we can make sure that, let's see how the models do in protecting what you value. But also, what are the sources of threat they see? You know, this area that you see on the bottom map, big red, you know, this blob, this is an area to the west of Port Fourchon where they said this is really a source of threat, the fragmenting marsh there, the open bay. That was one area that a lot of the residents pointed out as an area of concern for them. And the polygon we see here on the map, obviously, you know, it's very generalized. It was, you know, drawn in, you know, on this online portal. So the next step after this process was, well, we went back in office, and the area we see here is that red area from this map. We went through and refined it. We looked at, okay, if we're going to put the sediment here, we know how much sediment that we have. We know how much would it take to fill these areas. So we were able to go through and identify within that area where would be the best place where the sediment can go to do marsh creation projects, and then create a set of scenarios from these sets of projects within. So again, these project ideas came right from community members. These are places that they feel would do the most to protect the places and things that they value. And again, in conversation with the scientists, and I stress that, you know, the area here, if we go further out west, if the sediment would have been placed in this open water, we would not be able to build or rebuild any marsh there. The water depth, it wouldn't sustain that project. And the community members understood that, and it was part of that back and forth between the local knowledge experts and the technical knowledge experts. And once we had those projects in, that's where we took it to the modelers. Well, let's run the models. And again, that the competency group helped to change those model inputs. So let's develop the modeling framework. Let's do the model testing and calibration. Let's run the model alternatives for 30 years out. And we can see the bottom part. I don't know what happened there. But we can see on the bottom part of this, that's all of the different model suites that were used to run this. The top part, that participatory modeling, was really feeds this process. So again, the community members were instrumental in helping design the model and review the inputs. They designed the projects that we were running through the models to look at. But I do want to point, there's these other co-benefits: infrastructure protection, community resilience. Now, community resilience in particular, it's, you know, it's become a buzzword a lot more than it probably should be. But if we want to understand what makes a community resilient, we need to talk to community members to understand what it is that's important for their community. So on the social side, the kind of final part of this, as the modeling team was running the models on the different projects that were developed by the group. And I think there were 6 suites of projects that were designed that we had to basically review. And we went through and we ended up with 13 interviews for this. And then Ida hit, which, as you know, Ida made landfall directly in Fourchon. So we essentially ended our interview process with local residents when Ida hit. So before that, we were able to do 13 interviews, and each of them ranged from about an hour and 5 minutes to an hour and a half long to kind of go over each of the different project alternatives, fill out a little survey while we were talking to the folks. And really, let's understand, let's review each of these projects. What is the value of the projects, positive and negative? And let's understand what the impacts of these projects could be. So the example we see here are some of the graphic outputs that we use to take the survey results, really. Impacts to ecosystems, impacts to humans, impacts to wildlife and fisheries. So how do people think that this particular project would affect waves on their homes and camps? What about infrastructure? And we could see there wasn't always agreement. If we look at this area east of Port Fourchon, several people said it's not going to really affect our recreation or subsistence catch. But there was also a portion of them who said this is going to harm this. And a few people said it's going to benefit it. The same thing we see with crab, shrimp, oysters, and fish. For this particular project, the wetlands everyone said this is going to benefit the bird habitat. And a large portion said mammal habitat, which means you're likely going to have a negative impact on some of your fisheries if you're building land. So that was part of that process, was going through. And again, with interviewing on what is the recreational value of each of these 6 suites of projects, the cultural value, the education and research value. If we place the sediment, for example, right along LA1, and we had some school teachers involved in this. So you're going to have more educational value if students can go and actually look at it, but you still have educational value if they can teach about it. So I think those are the types of conversations that came out when we were trying to go through and look over these projects. And again, we can see the groupings of the projects here in the map on the left, where we have some areas as far up as Leeville, and then this area west of Port Fourchon, east of Port Fourchon. And then, unfortunately, we weren't able to survey these areas north of Port Fourchon. They kind of came out of some later work where they said, well, let's look at this up here. So we were really able to look at these areas down here and then up with Leeville. And you can see, and we were able to quantify some of this using this social return and investment model that we adapted to account for, the number of residents who said this is going to happen, the severity of it. Is this going to be, is this impact going to be a major disruption to them, or is it just going to be something, it's going to affect it, but it's not going to be a tremendous impact. So we were able to quantify all of that and look at which of these project groupings would generate the most social value. And again, based on the community engagement. So in this case, it was this area west of Port Fourchon. And interestingly enough, that's actually what the model results, which came out after doing this, showed would be the most beneficial place for the use of sediment. So that's really kind of almost a ground truthing of the local knowledge of our residents, that the area they felt would generate the most benefit is also the one that the models show. So again, that's the final step of this is, while we were doing this social value ranking, and then we were running the models at the same time. So the landscape modeling, the AdCirc and SWAN modeling, plus the social return and investment assessment, those all combine to help the port in their final project selection. And that's where we are now. We just kind of finished this. We're trying to schedule a final meeting with our competency group and our first in-person meeting with them since February of 2020, and bring them down to meet with the port folks, go over the results with them, and this off to the port. So in conclusion, what I really wanted to stress here is the importance of integrating local knowledge with technical knowledge to really better understand the linkages of environmental change, social vulnerability, and community resilience. It's trying to find ways to use the tools available to us to integrate the local knowledge and the technical knowledge. But also, I think one thing that this shows is it's vitally important that key stakeholders are identified and consulted early and often in the planning process. Again, we did this before modeling and found a lot of areas where our models could be improved based on the knowledge we got from community members. This also allows us to build trust between the residents and the decision makers, and quite honestly, between the scientists who are doing work for the decision makers. Because if we're doing work, oftentimes scientists working for the state are not trusted because of the funding of where their science comes from. So I think bringing community members into this process can help really build that trust and let them as I mentioned before, open the hood on the models. Let's be completely transparent with how the models work, help them understand, but also let's get their knowledge and incorporate it in. And really, I think this type of community engagement is integral to defining the objectives and the variables needed to assess the project impacts. We're not going, without engaging with community members, that's going to be our on the ground monitors of what's going on, of the changes that these projects occur, are the people who are out in the environment every day. So it's really important to include community engagement early, but also after, when we're thinking about monitoring the impacts of these projects. So I'll mention the funding for this came from the Partnership for Our Working Coast, and also there was an additional grant from NIFWIF that was used to help with this. And it really, while I'm presenting this, it took a full group of folks from the Water Institute, but also this would have just been a normal modeling exercise if it weren't for the residents and the local stakeholders and the folks around Port Fourchon who took part in both the competency group and the social return and investment interviews. Again, that is what makes this unique. The project idea that the port will select came from community members. The models were updated with information from those same community members. And with that.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. That is, and I'm familiar with some of your work, but just seeing the specific projects and descriptions of that's, the kind of thing that for me is a real avenue for moving forward. Brooks?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to thank you again, Scott, for just being able to share share your research with us, or share at least part of your research with us, and also just including that community engagement into your research, because it's so important. But now, everybody, virtual round of applause for Scott. We have some time for maybe a couple of questions, maybe 1 or 2 questions, if you guys want to go ahead and hit the raise your hands feature in the reactions down below. You'll see it below your screen. If you hit the reactions button, you can raise your hand, or you can just go ahead and mention your questions in the chat, and we'll be more than happy to give those questions directly to Scott before we do our deep questions.
I see that several people raised their hands. Brooks, I think Simone was first. We may not have a whole lot of time to get to many questions, but Simone.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have a few questions, but maybe just respond to what you want, since I want other folks to have a chance to go. But thank you so much for the presentation. Really interesting stuff. So I want to ask, I think that one way to look at integrating local knowledge, translating that into usable data for modeling, that it's still within the context of the framework of the master plan. And so I wonder if there are opportunities for thinking about how that quantification of local knowledge can maybe even expand some of the framing of the master plan in terms of what is valued, because it seems like from what I understand, that projects are still sort of selected based on certain criteria. And so in that way, the local knowledge is sort of an input, but it's not necessarily elevated to really being key planners in the process. So that's one question. I'm curious about scaling up these types of endeavors because it does seem pretty resource intensive. And what would it look like for this to be going on for, you know, coast-wide? And then also curious about ethical concerns around local knowledge, particularly for the tribal folks, for that indigenous knowledge that, you know, in the past maybe has been utilized for benefits that have not gone to indigenous people. There's that justice issue, and you know, kind of the availability of highlighting that public that type of knowledge might be cause for concern. So I threw a lot of things at you. Maybe just respond to what you want.
Well, and I will say with the kind of master plan assessment, and you're right, there is a very limited, essentially, I mean, the maximum amount of land built and the maximum amount of people protected are the primary drivers of the master plan. And I think that's the project that we developed, the Plaquemines Parish one in particular, that will be modeled as part of it. All of those kind of resilience factors that we talked about that are baked into that project, those are not part of that decision-making process. So in that example, if that project is selected to be modeled, it's not going to be on the basis of the resilience factors we identified. It's going to be on the basis of land building and protecting the most amount of people. Now, we're kind of if it gets selected, those benefits will be there, but they're not part of that decision-making process. But I think that gets to a broader concept on the whole benefit cost analysis in general. And it's not just CPRA, it's a lot of the agencies where you have a very limited set of criteria that go into a BCA that we need to kind of rethink and incorporate some of these things that that we hear from community members, and rethink how is social value, even with ecological value, that BCA process doesn't take into account some of the social and ecological things that we know are vitally important. And your question on the ethical concerns, I think particularly in identifying places of value, that is definitely a concern there, that, you know, particularly with things like mounds and things like that, that we have to be careful on, you know, not showing those, or making sure that it's, you know, buffered out to a wide enough area that, you know, you can't pinpoint these areas that the tribes are rightfully concerned about protecting. So I think there are definitely some ethical and privacy issues that need to be taken into account with this. And the scaling up, I think there's, yeah, it's intensive in the amount of time it takes, but I would say the cost of bringing some of your modelers together, you know, even on a monthly or bi-monthly meeting with community members in select communities, I would have to imagine is minuscule compared to the actual cost of doing a lot of this. So I think the resources need to be there, but we also need to, part of this kind of two-way communication. Yes, we want communities to learn about models, but we need our modelers to, you know, learn about the local knowledge and the importance of local knowledge of it. So the scaling up, I think there are ways we can do that. Some of these, you know, we're gonna have some very local type impacts if we're looking at individual. When we get to the master plan, we would obviously have to generalize and try to, you know, select representative communities. Maybe we want a rural fishing community and a rural agricultural community, and try to find a way to get a representative sample of the geography, and then engage with folks in each of those representative samples.
Hey, everybody, I think I'm going to make an executive decision here and kind of cut into our deep question time, which comes later, because it looks like a lot of people are interested in asking Scott some questions. So I think we'll continue on with the questions for a moment more. And I believe, Miss Ann, you had something, you had hand raised.
Yeah, I did. I really like what is being attempted here. I live in the lower Ninth Ward in Orleans Parish, just above St. Bernard. And so we face the same or worse contamination issues and flooding issues as St. Bernard. We've worked with a lot of community effort to get change in many different ways. How did you recruit those that you consider typical residents of those places and those areas? And did you document in an honest and realistic way gender, ethnicity, all of the other factors that maybe don't make a difference when it comes to a big picture, but it does let you know whether or not you are actually talking to a representative selection from the community. What was your process on that, please, Scott?
So we used basically a snowball sampling method where we reached out to some of our initial contacts, and then we just started kind of talking to folks and finding out who they would recommend, and we ended up with a sampling based on that. Some of the folks particularly with the Port Fourchon project, there were several folks that said, you know, they wouldn't be able to commit to the, and we did, I should also say we reimbursed the residents for each of the meetings they attended. So I think I don't think I mentioned that in my presentation, but that was important. We're being paid to be there, so should they. But some of the folks who couldn't attend, the idea was we would engage them in that interview process because they were looking for a way to be in, but couldn't do the kind of extended amount of time. And some of our other work, we reached out to, you know, we would reach out to, for example, a Sea Grant extension agent, and they would put us in touch with a port director and, you know, kind of build the network that way. For the Lower Plaquemines work, we directly worked with BitNep. So Susan Testerop Bergeron helped us kind of build our stakeholder group with that one. And it was essentially a snowball sampling method that we tried to be as representative of the community as possible. Sometimes it wasn't, we didn't get as many groups as we wanted. For example, we weren't able to get, you know, our United Homa Nation interview for the social return and investment, the person we were going to interview there, that was scheduled right after Ida hit. So in that case, we missed, and I would say that was a big miss for us in terms of trying to engage that particular group. So we try to be as inclusive of the community, looking at the demographics and stuff ahead of time and making sure that we have the right group that is representative. But again, it's the snowball sampling method where we try to find people who are most commonly recommended by other community members to make sure that the folks we had there, because I mentioned it was we get 10 to 15 people in the group. We want to make sure that those folks are well trusted by the other members of the community.
Thank you very much for your
and real quick, I know a lot of you love our deep question section, but everybody seems to be pretty engaged here, and you know, we can be flexible. So I want to continue on with a question or two at least, and go from there. And so Gary, Dr. LaFleur, I think you had something you'd like to ask.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Dr. Hemmerling. I appreciate this this protocol of using local knowledge to inform projects. I was wondering if you had a recommendation about, you know, if CPRA is going to restore land, what efforts CPRA might also put forward to restore culture or to preserve culture of the people of the coast, rather than just make land, also somehow protect the ecological knowledge?
I think that gets to kind of the previous question on they need to change the metrics that are used, or we don't want to throw out obviously amount of land and people protected, but we need to really look at other metrics and really take a deep dive into these other and I think that's the main thing we need to do, is really change their benefit cost analysis process that's there. And I think that begins with, again, that let's engage early and often. I feel like in 2023, they're engaging a bit earlier in the past, but it's still, I think we could still do a better job with a deeper level of engagement. I think initially, at least I hope we're kind of beyond the point where it's a public presentation a month before it's due to go to the legislature, and then, or the 30-second at a podium chance to discuss. I think we're beyond that a little, but I think it's really going to involve community engagement right from the office, right from the jump, and really, and the committees or working groups that they pull together, let's make sure that that's the right group of people, and it's not. I think that's really the key, is just kind of getting the right people at the table, and ones who are willing to ask the hard questions, but also just engage early and often. I mean, it's, you could do a lot of community engagement for the cost of probably putting some type of platform in one of the bays. I mean, if you look at kind of the benefit cost analysis of that, there's a lot of benefit. And honestly, the cost is fairly low in the overall scheme of things. It does take time, it takes effort. We need, and I know the modelers over there and our modelers here are always crunched on this. It's your churn and burn for 8 hours a day, but you need to take a break from that and make sure that, so I think that's good. Yeah, I think it's going to require a kind of rethinking of what we do. And again, open the hood on the models. Let's let people know let's not have black boxes in our master planning process.
Okay, thanks.
Again, you guys, I think we always point out this isn't solely a speaker meeting, but Scott's got everybody. This is a great conversation and dialogue we got going. So let's keep going. Maida, I know you wanted to chime in or ask something.
Yes, Scott, would you talk a little bit more about the number of people who participate locally? You talked in general about how they were selected, but are they the same olds that are willing and have the time and means to do this kind of thing? Are they compensated? I think you said they were compensated, but how much? If it's $25 and somebody would have to not go to work one day, that's not gonna cover it.
Right. We have, and we go to where they are. So, and we usually, like our St. Bernard project, the one I said was over 8 months. We went down to the Isleño Center in St. Bernard, and the meetings usually started 6 o'clock at night. So after they got out of work, but we also, for each of them, we tried to pick a different local restaurant. So we would bring food, and really the first half hour was just us getting to catch up with the fishermen, looking at pictures of the sunrise that they show us and things like that. But for those ones, I think we did $50 a meeting, and we did it in Visa gift cards. So it was, very quick and easy. We, how many meetings did they attend? And then, went and got the gift cards and provided them to the community members. So we tried to work around their schedule, not make them work around our schedule. And I will say the kickoff meeting that we had down in the Fouchon project, and again, we drove from Baton Rouge down and drove back that night. The community members stayed for an hour after the meeting ended, just because they really wanted to show us, and we had some of the maps up. So we ended up staying an hour afterwards, and as long as they needed us to be there. So yeah, I think for me, this really is about relationship building, and that's as important. And honestly, that's the downside of COVID for this. While we still were able to do the engagement process, we missed that kind of, that first half hour, just sitting over a meal and chatting with people and catching up, because that's really part of that trust building. you can't replicate that on Zoom, as despite the fact that we're all on Zoom now. So yeah, we try to work around them. We've actually, for other projects where we did local knowledge mapping, I think one of the first project that I did when I took over the Human Dimensions program here was, yeah, we had our little workshop meeting. We had one in Delcom and one in St. Bernard, but then we went to the Delcom market and we set up a table there. So we were set up between, there was someone selling candles and there was, you know, someone frying fish right next to us. And we set up and did the local knowledge mapping. So if people wanted to stop by, and we brought educational things so the kids could come. If they didn't want to do our mapping, they didn't have to, but we could do some educational exercises with their kids. We did the same thing in St. Bernard, where they had an event, the Sippin' on the Bayou event. It's a lot more fried food and beer in St. Bernard than there was in Delcom. But it was still, we went out and it was going out and spending that night. And again, going to where they are. So whenever possible, that's what our goal is to try to go where they are. And I tried not to get, wherever possible, the same old. I think people are always at the public meeting. We want those people. We want the people with the voices, but we also want to get, you know, that 80-year-old woman in Delcom who still lives in the house she grew up in. That's a type of source of knowledge we want to get, in addition to the floodplain managers and the levee folks, bringing it all together. So,
man, you know, Scott, this is great. You are very literally reiterating the things that we're pushing for, and that we're, you know, some of the real impetus behind the Bayou Culture Collaborative here. And I know we're running way behind, so let's see if we can real quickly. Miss Lenore, I know you had something to say, and then we'll figure out, or ask, and then we'll figure out where we're going to go from there. This is a great conversation, though.
Yeah, sure. And I'm just kind of willing to share, you know, one of the things, Scott, you know, you hit on is the issue with the master plan and the lack of where culture really fits in it. And so one of the things I had posted in the chat is there really is, in the whole mechanism of their the system they use to select projects and all of this stuff, it's really based on hard sciences, and there's not a place that culture fits into it. And so I can peel back the curtain, I think, for some folks a little bit. A couple of years ago, when the current master plan was being worked on, I was asked to serve as an alternate community representative on their advisory committee. And the advisory committee was probably about 40 people, but there were only like 2 community reps, one rep and an alternate. And then you had representation from all these other individuals. And so they actually laid out for us how the formulas are determined, and there really isn't a spot, and they haven't figured out how to fit culture into their formulas. And I think part of the problem lies is that the individuals that are advising in the development of this are really from the hard sciences. And I don't think there's a big representation of folks from social sciences in there, or that can speak up and say, but where does social science fit in, and where does culture fit in? There's kind of a nod to saying we give consideration of culture, but it really isn't in the formulas, which is how they make decisions. And so that's problematic. But even within from when I recall sitting on that steering committee, I mean, there's only 2 community representatives sitting in that room. And so that in itself is problematic too.
and one thing I always say, and kind of to get to that point, is if we went to someone on the master plan and said, are you protecting the things or places that people value? They can't answer that question, because without social science, we don't know what people value, and the models can't show that. So yeah, are we protecting the things that people value? If we can't answer that question, then there is something wrong with the process.